I like the debate, and in this job, I need to listen to a lot of voices. And I think in every statement there is some truth, and then you need to confront that. And that's why I like reading what you and others write or post.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for taking the time to answer my questions.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. So, for those who are not familiar, Mr. Frieden has a master's degree in business law from Paris at Panthéon-La Sorbonne. Then you went to Cambridge at Queen's College for a master's of comparative law. And then you finished in Harvard Law School for a master of laws. You worked from 89 until 98 as a lawyer. And that's when you joined several governments from 98 to 2013, always with Jean-Claude Juncker as Prime Minister. And you had several positions from justice, defense, budget, treasury, and of course, finances. For someone like me, following politics, I'm using two main sources. There's the Accord de Coalition, that's 209 pages, which I recommend to every citizen because it's really, everything is in there. The plan is extremely clear. And I also recommend your speech from the State of the Nation, which took place in June the 11th, which also I believe has a lot of very clear directions. And there's also an illustrated version, which is giving an overview. Just to remind people, the coalition agreement is titled Making Luxembourg Stronger for the Future. And your State of the Nation was simpler, better, modern. And just to conclude, I tried to sort all the priorities. Of course, you need to adapt to a new geopolitical reality, which is extremely complex. Everybody understands we all need to simplify procedures here. You need to implement very strong social policies, and it's already happening. You were elected on a pro-business idea, and of course that means you need to work on the attractiveness, on the competitiveness through fiscal, financial, and economic initiatives. And then you shouldn't forget also the climate and the energy transition. And with all that, we still haven't talked about what I call the bombs, the thing which keep you extremely busy, which are not really a priority, but become one. I have in mind, of course, housing, which kept you extremely busy over the past 9 months, or stories like Caritas, again, which I'm sure kept you busy all over the summer. My first question for you, where are you in the implementation of the coalition agreement?
We are at the beginning of this government. A government has been elected for 5 years, but obviously a lot has to be done in the first 3 years, and because it takes time afterwards to go through parliament and so on. This being said, you mentioned the 200 pages. What is clear in that document, and also in my mind, is what are the big lines that are the basis of this agreement. And that is more purchasing power. That is more for young families. That is more renewable energy. That is more competitiveness, because I have been elected and I strongly believe in the fact that only if we have companies that are doing well, they can create jobs, who are paid well, interesting jobs, and that with that, these companies will pay some taxes, a reasonable amount of taxes, not too many, because that's why we don't raise taxes, why we lower taxes, and thereby we can finance our social needs that a country has and we want to finance, and of course the ecological transition, the energy transition, which will cost a lot of money. And I would even add the defense expenditures, which were not foreseen in my mind when we started. That is the roadmap that I gave to this coalition, and that is my plan every day. And I'm checking every day, are we making progress on one of these main points which I just mentioned. The rest are details, but of course each minister needs to implement the details so that we come back to these broad lines that I have in mind, and that have, again, I've been elected on that. This government has been, I think, confirmed on that. We have a rather broad majority in parliament in comparison to the previous two governments, so therefore we cannot fail, we have to implement this.
And one thing which is, I think, very important is, personally, I'm always wondering if the population is aware of what you just described, which is, first you make money and then you spend the money. We see or we hear in the press or in conversation some people who are anti-business, which I never really understood. Personally, we did some little question in the streets, just questioning about key numbers, like, how many % of the corporate taxes come from finance. It's official, it's 75%. I don't think people are aware. Another number, it's going to remind you some old memories. Do you remember Robert Kiefer from the CNAP, who was telling us in 2008, 2009, 3% of growth of GDP is not reasonable. My understanding is we are still running on this model, and we know we're not going to get 3% of GDP growth. It's very realistic. We're not going to get it until at least 2030. Do Luxembourgers know that 3 workers out of 4 don't vote? What do you think about this? Do you think the population is well informed about those key numbers?
I think they are, but they try to forget. I think we are telling them, and I think the majority of the people are not stupid. The majority of the people know that, but it's rather comfortable not to remind yourself every day that these are huge challenges. And it is a very atypical situation. It's very rare that a country depends so much on one sector. We had it with steel, now we have with financial services, and we cannot replace that from one day to another. We can add things, diversification is necessary, we will do it. I think they're comfortable, but I think also, and I met many during the election campaign, I think many are aware of the challenges we are facing. Now, being aware of something does not yet mean that you accept changes. And I think we cannot do things with a revolution, we need to do it with an evolution. And the difference between the private sector, in which I used to work in the past 10 years, and running a country is that a democracy is slow because you need to build a majority. And that is also something positive on the other hand, because obviously in a dictatorship you decide things and then people follow or not, but if they don't follow, they pay the price for it. We need to convince people that a certain number of things are necessary. And again, there I come back to the mandate that we have. The Liberal Party and my party, the Christian Democrats, who form this government, I think we have a strong mandate to implement what we have promised, and we will do so.
Another question which I think a lot of people have in mind is focus. And I would like to give you a very good example from the Ministry of Economy. The official number of startups and scale-ups, I checked it this morning, it's 519. It's on a website called Deal Room, and then you look for Luxembourg and you find it. Well, if you scrape a little bit, it's completely absurd because it's just a collection of companies since 2003. So a lot of them have been sold. It's just nonsense. My problem with that is that I do believe we have a lot of fantastic startups in the country, but not many, maybe 10. And they find themselves lost in a so-called 519 pool, which is not existing. And so we fail to support them. I can give you one name. Are you aware of Fundcraft? You know this company? It's a Luxembourgish company, but they're not they're completely driven. They work extremely hard, and they're not friendly. They're not going to queue at the Chamber of Commerce to fill a document of 73 pages. Not that kind of people. Hardworking entrepreneurs. I don't think people know them. I know their numbers. They are incredible. Millions of turnover, dozens and dozens of employees, but they're not on the scope just because they got lost into this and they got tired of it. So how could you get every ministry to focus on what really matters and maybe get rid of the nonsense sometimes? Focus
is important. I agree with that. Obviously, that depends on the ministry and but in general, I think a lot of people are not aware of the difficulty of running a company, be it a startup or be it a company that is a little bit more established. I have high admiration for people who are running a business, small and medium-sized companies. And that was already my impression before I became chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. I know what these people, every day they have to look, how much do we sell, how much is our income, how much are our costs, and how do we survive?
How do we hire people? How do we keep them?
And I think we need to put that much more in the focus also, to show how is the shop around the corner doing and how do they work. And I think that is something that if we are aware of that, because again, all the others who make money because they get a fixed salary, including those working for the state, I'm not saying that they are not aware of that, but we need to make people aware that an economy is not turning from itself, but that you need to push it, to support it, and that's why we are doing measures like diminishing bureaucracy in various areas, because it has always been said simplification administrative, but in housing, even in the fight against poverty, we realize that there are a lot of things that have become so complicated that these kind of people do not manage to fill out the form. So it's not even the business people, they don't want to do it, but the others can't do it. So we need to show that real life is not easy, and we have as a state to focus on putting the context, the framework a little bit more easy, and then each minister needs to do that in his or her area. I give you an example, a recent one. You know, we have now in autumn the grapes that are being collected.
Yes.
We need a lot of people to do that. The rules were too complicated because hiring a person, going to the medical checkup and filling out the papers, you know, the season is very short. So we said, if we want to be business friendly, we need to ask the Minister of Agriculture and the Minister of Labor to come up with a scheme which makes it possible if you hire somebody for 3 weeks, then he does not have to run through all that bureaucracy that is needed if you hire somebody who is working on a construction site for 20 years and where indeed it is important that you check whether he's physically apt to do it. So being more business friendly is at the same time also making the lives of the small and medium-sized companies easier. Of the startups, it's the same, it's only a different type of people very often who launch these companies, but it's the same dynamic.
Absolutely.
And I think, and I'm convinced we'll make progress there.
Yeah, definitely, that's a fantastic idea, and it could also be applied to restaurants. You know, that they lose employees just like that. The guy who was supposed to wash the dishes is gone. What do? I've heard several times they would like to get this one-click hiring where you just take the guy who wants to work. And yes, there's a disconnect. A last question about that. It's about the simplification, of course, and the attractiveness. I was looking really the law of rental lease. It's been voted recently. It came into power, I think, in September 1st. And for me, it was a very, very clear example of something that everybody knew had to be done, because Luxembourgers send their children to Paris, to the south of France. Nobody wants to pay 3 months of guarantee, 100% of the commission. You know, it's 7,500 euro for a 1,500 euro studio. We all knew it had to be done, but it took 4 years to be voted, and we know why. It was blocked because of the plafond of rents. 4 years for a law that we so badly needed. How can we stop this kind of insane delay and get things done more like the Werner dynasty, you know, where we decide, we discuss, we vote?
That's what we did, because these 4 years were not us.
It was not you.
It was the previous government. We entered government on the 17th of November, and the law was passed before the summer break.
That is true.
The previous coalition did not agree on some of these topics, and that explained why this law, I think, was so long on its way. I think this government has a common philosophy on many of these issues, and so we said this needs to be changed, and this was part for us also of making the housing market more dynamic, because you have the owners, you have the renters. So we introduced a number of measures. Not all of them are yet in force, but they were decided and they will be implemented, and this was one of them. So the 4 years, leave that for the previous government.
Very good. And I think the topic behind that, which I believe will come back in the interview, is that when we look from the outside, we'll talk about pensions in a few moments. The general feeling is that you really have an opposition between personal interest and general interest. You can see it in the rent, you can see it, I call it, I feel a lot of greed right now between owners and people who try to make a decent living. Do you feel this opposition that you've got on the one hand a lot of people who want to do the best for the future of Luxembourg? That was the introduction of your state of the country, of the nation speech. But at the same time, a lot of people, maybe it's part of a country who became so wealthy, focus mostly on their own personal interest.
Isn't that the case in most countries?
I don't know.
I think we always have to remind people that we are part of a community, we are a small community, and only if we are living in a rather harmonious way, we can move on. Now there's an additional situation which is typical for Luxembourg, is that, for instance, taking the housing situation. I think the elder generation own houses. The Luxembourg population owns houses, so very often their children inherit a house or an apartment. Whereas, of course, we have had of the past decades quite a lot of new people who came to Luxembourg. And fortunately, they came to Luxembourg because that made us wealthy. But they are struggling differently with the housing situation than many of those who have built a house 50 years ago, where the land was cheaper because there was less demand. So I think that conflict, we do have it in our population. How do we put together the interest of those who have something and those who need something? We have that when we have discussions in city council whether there should be 3 or 4 levels of a house that are being built. We have those questions on many issues, probably also on the pension issue. So the country has changed dramatically over the past 5 decades, I would say. Even in my political career, it was a long political career and it's far from being finished, but I do realize that the country has changed to the better. It has become a more modern country, more digitalized country, more trendy country in terms of culture, in terms of everything we have. But at the same time, that creates, of course, a huge problem. And that's also the tension we have on the growth topic. You mentioned the growth that is less than the growth we would need to finance everything.
3% or 4% after
we now have 1.5%, and we are already happy to have it, because last year before we came, it was a negative growth, which is dramatic for a country. And I want to push the growth, yet at the same time making sure that with infrastructure, with housing, we can cope with schools. So it is a huge challenge, and nevertheless, I think there's no alternative to a growth path, because without growth, I think we will be off less well. But that is a debate that we also need to have in this country.
And also for the rental lease, we know that there's a part which will come back now. I guess Mr. Maisch will have to bring up this limitation. For those who are not familiar with it, young people in Paris, for example, the rents are limited. This creates new problems, because suddenly you've got 100 people trying to rent the same apartment, but it's quite cheap. Whereas they arrive here, and the first thing they see is an apartment for 1,500 euro, plus now 2 months of guarantee and after the commission. So this is why we all lose. I run a company too. We lose a lot of people just because even if you pay them well, they see what they spend. And the perception of being poor, maybe mathematically it's wrong, but the perception is enough to take them back to Paris or somewhere else.
This being said, in that context, because we also as a government, I said it's one of my 10 priorities also to support young families, we are in the process of introducing quite a number of tax measures also to support especially young people. Monoparental is one category, but also some supports for rents, for acquiring houses, so direct and indirect taxes. So the focus on young people who want to acquire or rent a house is part of our strategy and of the measures we have already decided.
Yeah, there's a lot of initiatives. Again, I encourage people to read your speech. There's 7 or 8 distinct initiatives, and I think it's worth trying them all. We'll see what works in the future.
We have to improve our communication, because I think many of these measures, I realize that when talking to young people, I have myself two kids who just started working, and I realize when talking to them and their friends that many of these measures are not that well known, because we present this as we as a government, the Minister of Finance, And it's then 10 measures, some of them being rather technical. And so it is our role, together probably with audit companies and others, and the journalists, of course, to talk about these measures so that they are better known. So we can improve our communication.
One thing I can share with you, I run the communication agencies. You go one by one. You get one measure, you let it sink in, and then you take another measure. When you get 10, people forget it.
Yeah, I get that advice for free, I hope.
Of course. So we can switch to the second part, and it's really, I would like to see your vision in terms of risk and opportunity. Mm-hmm. How do you assess those two things in the future?
For me, opportunities are always much higher than risks, because if you only look at the risks, you don't do anything. I wouldn't have run for office.
True.
Also last year, I was away for 10 years if I wouldn't take on some risks. I didn't do it lightly, but the same is true for a country. I think also when you do a certain number of things in a company or in a country, there are always side effects. But then you need to put things on balance, and therefore sometimes you need to, faut bousculer les choses, you need to do some things which you believe in. So I see for our country opportunities. And I'm always impressed by those who governed before us. If I think that some 70 years ago, the then government decided to become a founding member of the European Union at the time, of NATO, of the United Nations, of the Bretton Woods institutions. Amazing. The country was much smaller, but there were leaders who said, we need to sit around the table.
Mr. Besch, yes, at the time was very active.
Joseph Besch, he's on all the pictures you can see. And that was courageous, because probably people said, what are we doing in New York? What are we doing in Rome and Brussels? Same is true for predecessors of mine who took the risk to launch the satellite company. And I did things like that in the financial sector, some things that were criticized, and I accept criticism, and accept them even more today than maybe at the time. I think a country has the tools as a sovereign state to take opportunities that are out there, and we need to do that. We need to do it again more. Mm-hmm. And why did we stop a little bit? Probably because we became, as a nation, more wealthy, and if you become more wealthy, you become a little bit more lazy. And you think it's God-given, and Luxembourg is beautiful. And I have been living also abroad, as you know, and I saw that the others were not sleeping. My wife is Dutch. I see that in Holland there's a lot of business-driven activities that might be a little bit different now with the new government, but still, Ireland is very active. Others, London, it's outside of the European Union. I think that harms them, but still, they are very active. So for me, there are also opportunities in the competition. I like looking what others are doing and then say, why are we not doing it? And so, for instance, with the Minister of Economic Affairs, Mr. Dallas, I said, I don't like the position where we are in these competitiveness indexes. Now, you can always discuss some of these criteria, and we will always be a little bit more behind because we don't have big universities with research.
But we lost like 25 seats in 1
exactly.
year.
So I sat down with the Minister of Economic Affairs and I said, we can't accept this. So let's look what other countries which are more or less similar than Luxembourg, Switzerland, Denmark. So I'm not going to look in other continents. Mm-hmm. What are they doing to be more attractive? And that is where I see the opportunities. Mm-hmm. Risks, there are always. I mean, you can always fail in something. There are always things that happen around us which we cannot control. I mean, the war in Ukraine, terrible, but you know, it's a fact. We have to work to help repairing that, but it comes from the outside. But at least for where we are responsible, mm-hmm. we should do our best.
Yeah, and I think one comforting thing for Luxembourg is we know that the country does really well when things go bad. I'm thinking 1929, which was the start of the Holding 29 and RTL. That's when it started. So this very strong capacity to invent something fast. 1981, the creation of the banking secrecy. Mm-hmm. 1985 for SOS. And I remember really well when you were talking in 2007, 2008 that we will give back the banking secrecy. People thought it was the end of everything, and numbers demonstrated exactly the opposite. Even private banking did extremely well after the end of the banking secrecy. So I think we need to learn from the past also, that the country is very resilient, but we also need to learn from Argentina that it's not fun to go too low, so maybe let's fix it before. Let's go maybe to one big risk I see. I hear about it all the time when I read the media. It's social peace. It's almost blackmailing from me, from the syndicate, from the unions. I'm a big reader of CGFP. That's what I read for breakfast. For those who missed it, I mean, there was this absurd thing on April 29. There was a there were a manifestation. It's a protest inside a 4-star hotel. I don't think it's ever been done in the world. So people screaming things with big signs inside the 4-star hotel. How do you manage this? How do you find the limit between reaching consensus through dialogue, as you did for the housing issue, without being blackmailed? And I hear a lot the data is wrong, we don't believe the numbers. How do you balance that?
First of all, Luxembourgers like a harmonious living together. Social peace, social stability is part of the DNA of Luxembourgers. And I think it's also an element of attractiveness of the Luxembourg economy. So we should not only look at it as a cost, but also something that we are aiming at, because we, as Luxembourgers, never understood that in some of our neighboring countries, people immediately go into the street for everything.
The Germans now.
I was thinking of France, and I think it's, but also you saw that in Germany, when suddenly the airlines stopped flying, which for Germany that was unknown of, because then they asked for a 10% salary hike. Okay, so every country has its own culture and way to do things. It also has to do with the Luxembourgers do not easily go into the street. This being said, I think we need to. Social peace cannot be the only argument which will prevent us from doing anything. So I think we can achieve social peace by talking intensively to the relevant people. That is not only the unions, it's talking with the public in general, because I believe that the public is rather intelligent if you talk to them, if you explain things. We talked about that at the beginning of this interview. I think they're also reading newspapers. They see what's going on abroad. They might not always acknowledge things, but I think that we need to keep social peace and we need to make progress. It's a huge challenge also for government. But talking, explaining things to the people, I think that is the tool to do it, to achieve it.
I think this I call a lot for leadership, because I think the tripartite is precious. It was created in the 20s, last century, for CFL employees. Then it became generalized in 76. Or
the steel crisis, in the steel crisis.
It started earlier, and then it was generalized at the steel crisis, 76 or something like this. And at the time, they were really speaking together, but the country was doing bad. So it's easier to be together. Now, of course, we have a tripartite, which is a heritage from the past, but everybody is basically rich. So, of course, I think your ability to get things discussed harmoniously between the three parts will be absolutely critical. One thing about the short path. We hear about them all the time. I don't see them anymore. For me, there are short paths in the bubbles. So there are short paths within the public service and short paths between the private sector. I'll give you one example. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Tsume. Tsume is one of those incredible Luxembourgish companies in Zandweiler. Last time I went to visit them, it was 50 employees, 13 million euro of turnover, selling artwork in the manga world, you know, those Japanese heroes. And the CEO, Cyril Marquiol, called me last year. It was one of those late calls. There was a big problem with Worldline. He suddenly, because he was selling so much online, Worldline asked him to give a guarantee of 2 million euros. And I remember getting the call. I'm like, no problem at all. I'm going to give you a few phone calls. and it's going to be fixed easily. It was in May last year. Nobody answered my calls. And of course, we were that close from losing 50 jobs, a fantastic company made in Luxembourg. So I see this a lot. People tend to call me for those things. How could we reactivate those short paths between the public and the private sector and in every direction, basically?
So the question of mentality, again, it's to make people aware on both sides, but mainly on the public sector side, that these companies are struggling, and that is our role to make the lives of the people easier and to make it possible for them to develop their activities. We have an interest in them succeeding.
Of course.
And I think it's for the ministers to tell their people that we are there to serve the people and that they are our clients, but that we have an interest in them succeeding. And I think that's the way. So I think it's a question of mentality. Mm-hmm. I think it exists also in some departments, maybe more than in others, but it's something that we constantly need to remind the people that the life outside the public sector is sometimes very difficult, mm-hmm. and that we should not become too bureaucratic.
And if you're one of those struggling entrepreneurs, you know, Worldline was a good example. You need somebody from SNCI to call Worldline, sit at the table, say, come on guys, we're going to guarantee it. That's what we're here for. Easy. If the phone is not answering, I lived it. I spent 3 days on that, calling a lot of people. What should they do? Where can they just complain, basically, that they're not getting this contact anymore?
I wouldn't generalize, but I do know that. I think some of the professional organizations are very good intermediaries for that. I saw that at the Chamber of Commerce. I know it from the Chamber of Crafts. And so that is one way. The other one, of course, those who know people, it's easier for them than to get in, because you need to take these companies with their hand and to lead them to the place where they can get. There's no easy answer to your question.
Of course.
But again, for me, it's training our people that they need to answer the phone and that they need to help find a solution. And that I'm preaching that. I preached it in the past. And I'm starting preaching that again today. It's not to say, well, there's a problem, but let's see if there's not a solution. And I think that quite a number of my colleagues in government, especially those in charge of the economic sectors, finance, economy, are well aware of that. But we also need to put the framework in place that works at the end of the day. I'm talking always to the Minister of Labour about these things with regard to the ETM, for instance. Again, these people are doing their jobs, and at the same time they need to realize that some of the changes they ask for are maybe not technically possible, not in the short term. So let's see how we can find a solution.
So again, business friendly, of course.
Yeah.
A last question about this. Through my LinkedIn connection, I'm getting in contact with a lot of people, including from the public sector, and I know how talented those people are, very hardworking.
Yeah.
But several of them told me there's a problem. If I'm going to meet you, I need to put it in a register, and then everybody will see it. I don't want to do that, so let's not meet. I guess this was established as a way to create some kind of accountability, but isn't this counterproductive?
First of all, that was introduced before I entered government or re-entered government. This register is only there if people do lobbying with regard to a pending legislation, so there is transparency there. So I don't think that, from what I can see, that it is an extraordinary restriction to talking to people. So for most of the things you talk to, either to a minister or to a civil servant, this register is not applicable.
I don't qualify because I'm not lobbying for. Okay, that's a good news. Maybe it was an excuse not to say.
Yes.
I learned something. Thank you very much. So we can go to the last question. It's about the accountability at your level and at your government level. How do you measure your progress? You said you're looking, like me, at your accord de coalition, but do you have indicators? Could those indicators be public? I would really like to see how many jobs are created, how many new financial companies receive the license. It's very difficult to find.
Yeah, it doesn't exist, and I would also like to have it. I think we are not very good in these things because we are not a company. So we measure progress more ministry by ministry, and I would even say some can do that better than others because they have the tools, or it's more measurable. And it's also a little bit difficult because society changes all the time. You know that one of the topics I really want to make progress is the fight against poverty. Because I think from a moral point of view, we have to do something. But every day, there are new problems arising. So even if you do a lot, you're always running a little bit behind things. Still, nevertheless, I think we have already made some substantial progress there because we want to introduce something that is also important for the business world, the only one's principle. And I want to mention that here. It's important to fight poverty because of a lot of these people, you know, it's already difficult to fill in a form, and filling it 3 times is quasi impossible. Yes. So if we know who they are, we can go to them and say, hey, we can help you. The same is true for the business world. You know, you don't become a businessman to fill in for every ministry all the time the same forms. So that is a key principle I want to implement. There's a lot of resistance in some areas to do that because, you know, GDPR and everything. But I think lawyers always find solutions to problems. And I'm a lawyer and a politician. So I don't accept saying we can't do it. I think we can do it, and this government is determined to do it.
And I think right there you're on something extremely important. When I was reading your speech, I found what you did for people very, very interesting because, as you say, this is not their focus. They just want to eat and sleep in a place where they're safe. They don't even know what they're eligible for, let alone filling paperwork. And I found this brilliant because it's a clear example where you turned at 180 degrees. It's not people coming to the administration, it's the administration reaching out to people who need it. And if you use this change of paradigm for companies, back to Fundcraft, you know, I'm sure they didn't ask for the support they could have from Lux Innovation. Maybe Lux Innovation should identify them as tomorrow's champions or today's champion and roll out the red carpet. And that would be a massive change because certainly we would really be pushing big champions, maybe only 10, instead of 509 old companies. One thing about, again, accountability in the public service, I read on CGFP that basically the evaluation is out of the question for the next 4 years. That's fair enough, it's a deal. How do you reconcile this with a good quality of service for users?
First of all, I'm used to evaluation systems. Even in the law firm in which I was a partner, I was evaluated by my peers, and I quite liked it because it helps me setting my objectives. What we have and what we could even improve is that we have a system of fixing individual KPIs to the people. That is also the agreement with the Union of the Civil Servants foresees that, and that has not been abolished. I'm not sure it is very well implemented, but with my team, I give them objectives, and the people give me objectives. So I think giving an objective is not something which is negative. It is positive because you know what you have to do. Okay. So what is expected from you? And I think that is maybe something that we have to do more, at least to keep the machine going well. Now, it is different than in the private sector because there's no immediate sanction linked to it. So as the salaries are identical for everybody in the same category of people, so that is a big difference with the private sector. But still, I think we should use it as a positive tool to tell people what they have to do and to measure them and to tell them this was good, this was less good.
Okay, so this is acceptable from...
That is in the agreement. I think it's not enough known and used, but in small teams, I think it is done.
Okay, very good. Well, one specific thing, and then we are done. There's one case people talk to me about all the time, and so I was like, if they talk to me, maybe I'll talk to you too. It's a very difficult topic. I hesitate to talk about it because I know every time I do, I'm a target. I put a target on my back, and it's the law of the 25th of July of 1990. I don't know if you know what it refers to.
Yes.
It's when the state appoints people in boards of GIE, SA, or public administration. The law is clear. I have it printed in this document. The public servant needs to give the money back to the state. And then the state can decide if he wants to give a special remuneration. I think it's well known that this law is not applied. And my understanding as a citizen, this creates massive conflicts of interest and massive, for me, risk of disalignment of, if I'm a public servant and I give the money back, of course, I'm not feeling good if I know the others don't do it. For this, we don't need to get the law voted. It's already voted. Why don't we just implement it?
I share most of your analysis, except that what we do, in fact, is all the successive governments is that instead of saying you pay us the money and then you get something for the extra work you do, we say you can keep the money. So it's not a completely accurate application of the law, but the spirit is there a little bit. The main reason is that as every civil servant is paid exactly the same amount, it has become an element to give a bonus to people who work very hard, who work very well, and would in the private sector probably earn for that kind of work much more. And therefore, the successive governments since 1990, because I know the law very well, because I had in my ministry people who were representing me on board of directors when I served as Minister of Finance. So, and other ministries don't have such boards. So I think we need to review how we can introduce a better system, because indeed this law is not applied in a 100% correct manner. It is transparent because everybody knows who sits on these boards. So to that extent, therefore, I say it's not massive conflicts of interest.
It's public, but the remuneration is not the same.
The remuneration is not the same, but it's not a secret that they sit there. But I think we need to find ways to, but it's very difficult, I don't know how to do it, that not everybody, or that those who have an extra task can get paid extra.
Yeah, from my point of view, I would say it would be a fixed sum, regardless of which board it is. Otherwise, you go to Cargolux, I would imagine the remuneration is much higher than in another one. I don't have the solution, but again, this is a kind of topic where maybe it's an opportunity to inspire some upgrades. And again, in this case, we don't even need a new law. A very last question, and we're completely done.
But it relates to quite a small number of persons. So it's not a big number of civil servants, but still I think we need to think of a better system. So I tend to agree with you on that. And I read your posts, so I know what you have been writing on that.
I don't want to post this post because again, I know what are the risks for me and my company. I know that, we're in a ministry. I'm not having fun doing that. It's just, I feel it's necessary to do it. We're at a time which I believe is a very important crossroad. I think we're still on time. We can fix the country very fast, but there are risks. And I think we should prepare fast so that we don't expose ourselves to another 81 or 29 scenario.
Sure.
So the very last question is a question people asked me recently. I've met a few ministers, and the question is always, how can you post the way you post in the morning, but they still accept your interview? So you're here, then I'm asking you the question. You know my post, why did you accept this interview?
Because I think the strength of a democracy is the debate about things. And if we all say the same things, if we don't dare to talk about different topics, it's very bad for our democratic society. So I like, and that's probably one of the reasons why I came back, I wanted to improve things in my country, to contribute to the prosperity of my country, because I could have stayed in the private sector. It was a nice life there, it was interesting. And the other point is that I like the debate and the general interest. And so, you see, yes, we need to talk about things. Look at the debate that unwillingly I created a little bit about nuclear energy. I think it was, at the end of the day, I didn't want to create any chaos, neither in the government nor in general, but the mere fact of which energies we will have in the future, take into account that we need to go away from fossil, requires a debate. So I like the debate. And in this job, I need to listen to a lot of voices. And I think in every statement there is some truth. And then you need to confront that. And that's why I like reading what you and others write or post, and I do not have to agree with everything.
No.
But if I don't talk to you, then you become intellectually richer if you confront your own ideas with ideas of others, and that's what I like to do.
Of a good debate, and we close the circle, because if you remember, I started posting on LinkedIn every morning in May 2023 because I was complaining that the political campaign were too much about selfies and not about ideas, and so yes, I kind of threw the ideas that I did not hear during the campaign. Just to conclude, so in your speech in June, you said that your goal is really to take the country towards peace, freedom, prosperity. So I may not be specifically pro-CSV. A lot of people think I am. I'm just posting, and you're the Prime Minister. I welcome all good ideas who will make the country stronger. But for peace, freedom, prosperity, I will definitely root for you too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure too.